And we're going to start this. Good morning, Lida. I know you're in Texas. Your book is here, but you're in Texas. So, so I chose this poem from Mary Oliver as a different way to talk about some of the themes that are raised in Psalm 8. And does everyone know who John Muir is? The poem starts off with, if you're John. Okay. If you're John Muir, you want trees to live among. If you're Emily, and I'm a sidebar here, I'm assuming she means Emily Dickinson, a garden will do. Try to find the right place for yourself. If you can't find it, at least dream of it. When one is alone and lonely, the body gladly lingers in the wind or the rain, or splashes in the cold river, or pushes through the ice-crusted snow. Anything that touches. God or the gods are invisible, quite understandable, but holiness is visible entirely. Some words will never leave God's mouth, no matter how hard you listen. In all the works of Beethoven, you will not find a single lie. All important ideas must include the trees, the mountains, and the rivers. To understand many things, you must reach out of your own condition. For how many years did I wander slowly through the forest? What wonder and glory I would have missed had I ever been in a hurry. Beauty can both shout and whisper, and still it explains nothing. The point is, you're you, and that's for keeps. So it does touch on some of the parts of the poem, the psalm, doesn't it? Humanity, nature, our willingness to be part of that, to see it, to fall in love with the wonder of it. Is anybody familiar with the poem that have ever heard it before?
No. It's really pretty.
Very pretty, yeah. So Psalm 8, chapter 3, it's called Between Heaven and Earth. At least that's where our friend Rabbi Feld has chosen to land. You could go, I guess, in maybe other directions, but this is... can you guys just talk about if there was a highlight, what stood out for you this morning before I write down what I thought?
I've never had a chapter in a book where I underlined every word in it. I just kept underlining.
Anything at all?
One thing that I underlined was near the top of page 38,
Okay.
where it says, the notable discordancy between the ideal picture of heaven and the reality of existence is the tension that disturbs all religious life.
Amen.
Yep. He goes on to, we call that discordancy a paradox, right? That's another word for it, I think. Paradox meaning these things of maybe equal value that exist that we have to learn to live with. I think it's part of being a grown-up is we have to learn to live in the paradox, right? Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Bread on the altar is both bread and sacrament, right? Bread and body. Things that don't go together, things that are hard to justify. Violence in the world and God's lovely creation. Okay, that's a discordance, a paradox. Can you talk to me, Laura, about why that struck you like that? Do you know what it was about that?
Well, so many times I almost have a feeling of guilt that why, I think, why am I so fortunate when people are living with war and poverty and violence all the time? And it gives me a feeling of guilt.
Okay.
And sometimes I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, I think if we went around the screen and Linda and I in the room, we might, I think no one's going to disagree with that. I don't think that's and I think that's what he's trying to express, right? What he calls the question that comes up of what's evident in the Psalms is the expression of that on paper, right? It's the expression of those words. And then does it aid us in living in the in-betweenness between heaven and earth, right? Like we live in the in-betweenness of heaven and earth, given a great amount of power and agency, most of us, at least in this space. And yet we have the feelings that you're expressing, Laura, for sure. Thank you.
Well, and on the next page too, I think he speaks to that when he says that religious faith requires imagination and necessitates dreaming and hoping, denunciates a vision of hardly believable future.
It gives permission, doesn't it? Do you feel that? I felt him giving me permission. But when oftentimes when I'm thinking I'm hopeful, I'm just naive, right? I just don't know enough. I'm being Pollyanna. I'm not really seeing the whole picture is how I can, and I've had people say that to me. So it wasn't unbidden, but yeah, that's what we're called to is that hope. Now, does that hope lead somewhere? Maybe it just helps us sleep better at night. I hope there's more. I mean, I pray there's more than that to it. But what a great articulation of it. And then he continues in that next paragraph, Laura, to say, faith necessitates an understanding of the paradoxes of existence.
Where are you?
Page 39 in the third paragraph.
So Laura, is going back to what you said originally about you're in such a better place than so many people, than most of the people, but does that not speak to the calling that you feel from God to use what you got? I mean, I feel the same way, but that's it just bears on me that says you really got to step up to the bat and use what you were given. So.
Yeah, that hope does drive you to action.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren, I've seen the work that you do in this community, so I know you follow through on your words.
But it never feels like it's enough.
I know, I feel the same way because I've been all over this community and I've seen, the poverty, I think, is what strikes me in a lot of different places. And so often I'm looking, Gary and I are looking at our two dogs and their nice warm beds and their full bellies. And we say, our dogs have it better than having the children in this community. And it breaks my heart. Mm-hmm. So,
Are you cold?
Am I cold?
What? What happened?
I don't know.
I'm sorry. I think I had it off of mute. I was going to say something, and then the background noise got in, so I put it back on mute. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, it's not even that. It's the people that are living with bombs falling over their heads. People that can't even get anything to clothes to put on. I mean, it's just, it's hard to comprehend. I'm back on page 37, where it says justice does not predominate, but has to be fought for. And goodness is not rewarded and often leads to suffering. Life is not only a gift and a blessing, but is often filled with the tragic. Heaven and earth are experienced as separate realms.
Last paragraph on that page.
Yes. I-
So what does that leave you with?
Well, I wrote really. Obviously, it really leaves me with something. I don't know. It's like, is it all?
Is it, I mean, it's truthful, isn't it? Is that, I mean, our experience at least bears it up. I think our experience bears
Right.
that, right?
Right. But is it both in
In
It's
heaven,
both and.
earth?
It's both and.
yeah, that's the paradox, the both and, yeah.
I think. I mean, sometimes when we are happy, and our life has meaning, we feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but that doesn't mean it's every other instant in time in our lives has that thought. I mean, I think life is, it depends what your metaphor for life is, huh? If you think life is a party, you're going to be disappointed and you're going to waste your life throwing that party. But if you feel like life is a struggle for us to make it as much like heaven as God created it to be, then I think you realize there's going to be a lot of pain in life.
Yeah,
And we need to be part of that. When we see other people in pain, we need to be part of their struggle to get out of pain.
and so what's the hope of the psalm? Articulate that for me, can you? The hope of the psalm? How does he express that hope? It's in something that we all have experienced. In the seeing of a baby. He spends a great deal of time talking about the hope that we see in new life, particularly in human new life, and the joy that babies bring people. And now as a new grandmother, I can tell you that's true. I sent Kate a picture yesterday of Eugene, and she said something like slobbers and kisses and baby love, because the picture just evokes, it's evocative of joy. You can't, I mean, I get it. He's well fed, he's well loved, he's well cared for, all that, right? It's not sending me a picture of a baby somewhere else where some of those circumstances are not being met. So I'm aware of the paradox there as well. But I think the way the psalmist talks about the hope in infants is just, we can identify with that. That's a condition that most of us have experienced or know. And I'm feeling like we probably ought to read the psalm at this point. I was asking you kind of for your first, glimpse of it, like what was the first thing your takeaway was on the chapter. But let's read the psalm. Lawson, can I get you to read the psalm as it's written, beginning on page 35?
Yeah. Adonai, our master, how grand is your name throughout the earth. You, whose splendor is displayed on the heavens. From the mouth of infants and sucklings, you have found strength against your besiegers, quieting enemy and avenger. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what are human beings that you have been mindful of them, the descendants of Adam, that you have taken note of them? For you have made them little less than divine and adorned them with honor and glory. You have anointed them rulers over your handiwork, laying it all at their feet. Sheep and oxen, all of them, along with the animals on the range, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever travels the path of the seas. Adonai, our master, how grand is your name throughout the earth.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know what I learned from his footnote? And this will just show how uninformed I am. He said that God created them male. Adam is clearly both male and female.
Mhm.
Is that something I should have known?
I don't know, I learned it, but go ahead, Lawson.
Adam is the word for a human.
Yeah,
In the ancient, Hebrew, Adam is the word for a human.
it doesn't have a gender. Yes.
Right. I mean, it's you created a human,
Right.
and so
It's related to the word for earth, for clay,
the
Dust.
the dirt.
Right.
Yeah.
dirt. So it's like, what the story says in Genesis, out of the dust of the earth, God breathed life into life. So, yes, the names came later. A different writer, a different thing created the names of Adam and Eve. But so this psalm also has the literary element of an inclusio that may be familiar to some of you who have studied poetry, or even if you've studied the New Testament, many of the gospel writers use that element of writing, the inclusio, to sort of tell you what they're going to tell you what they're telling you, and then tell you what they said. So Matthew in particular does it, right? He sets up his stories in such a way, his time, in that he includes them. Just if you can see the word include, so it just everything in between is a certain kind of story, or a certain kind of healing, or a certain kind of message that they're trying. And it's a well-known practice, right? And it helps when you're telling a story. If you've ever listened to storytellers, right? Storytellers do the same thing. They have an inclusio because when they're beginning and then when they've ended. But as the rabbi points out, you don't hear the first line of this psalm the same way you hear the last line of the psalm. It's like, I'm changed in between. Something has happened to me. And now when I read those same words or hear them, I have a whole other appreciation. I have a whole other experience. My viewpoint is broadened. See and so even in that short number of 10 verses, even in that short space, there's transformation. There's transformation. And he talks about that quite a bit, that this is not, that poetry is not linear in that sense, right? He says right after that these are not works of philosophy. These are works of poetry. So they're not seeking to explain a philosophy or a way of thinking, but they are seeking to bring about emotion. This is what poetry is. This is what separates poetry from prose often. Emotion. It's trying to move us in a particular direction. Remember, these are psalms of orientation. They're confirming what we already believe to be true. There's nothing in here that is new knowledge in that sense. It's just getting expanded upon, right? This idea. So is there something in those intermittent verses between 2 and 10 that, really, struck you, that really, was something besides the hopefulness and speaking into the paradox that exists between what we know of the world and what we see of the world and what God's intention for the world is.
It seems that one thing that happens between the first and the last verse is that, I guess, verse 6 and 7, you have made them little less than divine and adorned them with honor and glory. You have anointed them rulers over your handiwork. That's kind of the catchphrase for me. What God has done by giving us consciousness of good and evil, which maybe that's another story. But since He has given us that consciousness, He has given our lives meaning, in that we are trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like when I read it, it's like one of those things where all of a sudden I started thinking about, this is really probably weird, of like things in nature that you don't think about. I mean, you think about people all the time, then God made them and all of that realm. But then when you start talking and thinking about how she made everything, birds and and everything functions. I don't know. I told you earlier, it just blew, the whole thing blew me away. I don't know exactly.
And we have charge over that. Like, then we have been given this authority from the authority, right? And I think that I can be overwhelmed by that in the immenseness of that creation, but then I'm in charge of that. We're in charge of that. We have been given this, I don't know, it's like saying to a 5-year-old, your brother is a baby and, I'm leaving and I'd like you to take care of them while I'm gone. Right? Like, just make sure that everything that a baby needs, you're gonna take care of. Well, okay, a 5-year-old might be able to do some of that, like hand them a pacifier, entertain them, maybe even change their diaper. I'm not sure. But you know what I mean? I don't think I didn't ever experience the enormity of that charge. Except in the way he laid it out and in my rereading and reading of it, right? That's an enormous responsibility.
No kidding.
Sometimes it's just hard enough to take care of myself. I don't even know I'm doing a very good job of that.
So you asked earlier, kind of what was your take on it? I think that was the way you put it.
Right.
Which feeds into what we're talking about now. But I had this strange idea that maybe I could find that by looking at the very end of the chapter. And if you look at the last paragraph in this chapter, I think it is the take on it. It says, to be religious, says the psalmist, is to embrace the paradoxes of life. To see God's power, one must view the world through the glasses of imagination and hope. The affirmation of this imaginative leap is the bringing of God into the world, uniting heaven and earth. And that may be in a big picture sense what our call is, to help unite heaven and earth.
And see, that totally threw me. I mean, because to unite heaven and earth, because heaven is what we're trying to achieve, but it's certainly not here. I mean, I think heaven is here. I think heaven and hell are both here, but I don't know, that paragraph, I don't know. It's very frustrated with this chapter.
But these are paradoxes we're dealing with. That's the whole thing. I mean, part of why you just said what you said, heaven and earth, hell and heaven, and whatever you said. I mean, those are all paradoxes. And I guess our role is, I mean, we all feel a calling, I know that, to do God's work, but that may be a very general descriptor of what this is all about.
Yeah,
Trying to bring these paradoxes, reconcile the paradoxes in some way, small or large, whatever, but I don't know. Just my
Thank
thought.
you. Thank you, Irv. And I've read this Psalm, I don't know, I mean, 1,000 times? I don't know. I mean, maybe more. And I loved it. I used it one time for a stewardship campaign, right? Like I loved it and it worked well for the stewardship campaign. It never had the intensity, or had the ability to think about paradox and uniting heaven and earth, right? I never had that sense of it. I do now. I'm not disagreeing with it, and I also highlighted that last paragraph, Irv, as kind of like at least I might be able to articulate that. And he did a tremendous job in laying out what are the paradoxes, right? He uses that the suckling infant thing, right off the bat. That this is, what does a baby do? A baby does absolutely nothing. Can't do anything, needs our help to do it. And that has so many implications for our spiritual life that made that kind of accessible, didn't it? Lyda, I know that you were trying to talk a while ago, and I didn't want to overlook you. So is there anything you want to add to this before we move on to Psalm 91?
No, because, unfortunately I can't read the book. So yeah, you get a lot more out of it in the book. I thought it was a beautiful psalm. And I just liked how he started, and he started at the beginning and ended at the end with the same thing. It's like after you've said all this stuff, you're just like really in awe and just how magnificent.
Yeah. Well, like I said, your book is here, so it's waiting to be read.
I'll swing by hopefully on Tuesday.
Okay, good.
Allison,
Yes.
if I could just say one more thing,
Absolutely.
bringing together what Irv said and Lawson a while ago talked about meaning of life. And I think when we're able to affirm that imaginative leap, that's when we can find meaning in our life.
Say it again.
When we're able to, the affirmation of the imaginative leap, when we're able to make that imaginative leap, that's, I think, can help us find the meaning of our life, what we should be doing. Because Lawson talked about how, I'm not sure exactly how you said Lawson, but something about you knew when you're in the right spot, when you felt like you were filling the meaning of your life.
Yeah, and that really leads into then a bit about Psalm 91, doesn't it? Where we further explicate this idea of what does it mean to be a human, what is the purpose of humanity, and who is, in his words, who is speaking. This is, he's got a couple of things happening in his conversation in his writing about Psalm 91. One is, who is the authority in writing this? And number two, kind of, how does it work to explain who we are as what does it mean to be human? What I find interesting is not just in his work, but in reading Brueggemann and in reading some different commentaries on the Psalms. I guess I missed this part, but I never realized how much the Psalms were used as a response to Scripture. How much Scripture is included in the Psalms themselves, right? And how they work together to sort of explain. And in Psalm 8, that would be to talk about some of the words written in Genesis 1 and 2, right? I mean, that one's kind of obvious, creation stuff. Psalm 91 not only, then from a Christian point of view, we also see Paul using the Psalms a lot in his writings, but even a lot of Old Testament stuff gets worked out in a particular way in the poetry of the Psalms, which makes sense because that's what we do, right? Events happen, people write books about the facts or the circumstances, and then poets come, and poets give us the feeling of the event. They give us the emotion of the event. They give us the heart of the event, if you will, right? We rely on poetry to help us understand the facts. That's what poetry does, I think, often. So, and do the Psalms do that as well? Do the Psalms then help us understand biblical truth? I'm not saying truth like scientific truth. I'm saying biblical truth, biblical theology, right? Psalms help us with that, the unraveling of that, with the reality of what we see, right? That's like an eyewitness account. You're having our lives have an eyewitness account of whatever's gone on in them. However, we've seen or not seen God's grace lived out, or mercy, or justice, or right? All those words we like to throw around about God. So we either see that lived out or we don't see it lived out. And then we have to have the Psalms to help us make sense of it. That's my takeaway. That's my takeaway for Psalm 91. So let's just read, he goes to a great deal of explanation about the authority of who is speaking before he gets to the Psalm, right? There's like 5 pages of sort of his take on the I of the poet, meaning first person of the poet. And that, do we think of it, I mean, because we're Episcopalians, our tradition does not, we believe that the books of the Bible are inspired by God, okay? Not written by God, right?
Right.
And who is the voice that we're hearing, and does it have authority? Now, in our tradition, we say scripture, tradition, and reason all have equal authority in the Episcopal Church. Scripture, tradition, and reason, right? So, but we do claim that that is an authority for us as scripture. Is there anything in those pages before he even gets to the Psalm that you would like to discuss or had a question about? He also says that he's trying to, we spend some time trying to locate the Psalm, meaning, was it used for private devotion? Was it used for public devotion? Was it used for public complaint? Was it used for private complaint? Was it used upon entering the synagogue? Was it used as they were moving the Ark of the Covenant? Was it used, when a king was crowned or enthroned? Was it a ritual? And he lands here that maybe that's not the most important thing, but he does know that there are different voices. This is the reason he's chosen this psalm, right? Because there are different voices, right? Lawson?
I thought it was interesting after he went through all of that, then he said maybe what this says to us is that within ourselves we have multiple voices.
Yes, right?
Mhm.
So there's latitude, and it may be on one Tuesday you read it, and that's what's going on inside of you. and it could be on another Wednesday you read it, and you can see a priest and a pilgrim having a conversation about the journey of the faith life, right? So yes, and maybe something we haven't even thought of yet, but I love that. Thank you. Thank you. But he says that if you, right before his translation of the Psalm, he says, I illustrate the points that he's made through two very different Psalms in which the speech of God becomes a critical element in the development of the poem. So in the last Psalm, we see that as a praise Psalm about creation and our part in it, right? This Psalm is a convert. So you see where we're moving? You've seen this when we started with Psalm 1, but how he's moving us through this development of the Psalms to address what he has called biblical theology. That paradox of understanding the splendor, the glory, the honor, the majesty of all those lovely things about God that we understand, but up and with, both and, as Lawson said earlier, with our own struggles to believe, struggles of our faith, struggles to understand, whatever the struggle is that we have in dealing with both our history and our present time. And as Irv pointed out, the uniting of heaven and earth, right? What is our place in that? So, let's see. Laura, can you read Psalm 91?
So,
And be listening for this idea he has of different voices.
whoever dwells in the secret places of the One on High lodges in the shadow of the Almighty. I would say to Adonai, my refuge, my tower, my God, I would trust him, for he will save you from the fowler's trap, from destructive plague. With his pinions he will cover you. Beneath his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness are armor and shields. You will not fear the terror of the night, the flight of an arrow by daylight, the plague stalking in the dark, or the scourge that may ravage at noon. 1,000 may fall to your left, 10,000 to your right, but nothing shall reach you. For you have but to look with your eyes, and you shall see the recompense of the wicked. For you, Adonai, are my protection. You have made your refuge the One on High. No harm will befall you, no disease touch your tent. For he will order his angels for you to guard you wherever you go. They will carry you in their hands, lest you stub your toe on a rock. You will tread on cubs and vipers, trample on lions and asps. Because he desired me, I will rescue him. I will raise him up, for he knows my name. When he calls on me, I will answer him. I will be with him in distress. I will strengthen him and honor him. I will sate him with a full life and show him my salvation.
Thank you. So right after that, he said, he gives his interpretation of the Psalm, offering reassurance and safety for the pilgrim. And he claims that it's the multiple voices we hear. And in the very first sentences of the Psalm, we meet the three distinct speakers, and the intertwining of these voices prepares us for the emergence of yet another voice at the end of the poem, the voice of God. He asked the question, who speaks the first sentence?
Well, maybe a priest, he says.
Yes, maybe a priest.
Entering the temple.
Yeah. Or he says it as, maybe it's like a sign you'd put over your doorway, right? Like I have the quotation from Numbers or whatever, or from Joshua, as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord, right? That's on the outside of my front door, right? So, the same thing could be that way. Where else have we seen it? You know, many churches, post the Isaiah, this is a house of prayer for all people. That kind of a thing. Something that sets the tone for what the person is entering.
Well, the song that we sing, I never thought it was from 91, but it's an awful lot like 91. Maybe it's, the song that we sing, you who dwell in the shelter of the Lord, who abide by his, by night. I probably remember the words because I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah,
Least you gnash your foot against a stone. It's a hymn that's it's one of my favorites. I can't understand why I can't remember the words, but it's like 91. I thought it was from a different psalm, but I must have been wrong because that's the hymn that we sing. That is it? It's not. I will raise you up, is it?
On eagle's wings,
On eagle's wings. I think
I
that's.
will
I'll
raise
raise you
you
up
up
on
on
eagle's wings.
eagle's wings,
On you on
bear
the
you on the breath
breath of
of
dawn.
make
And
you
you to
shine like
shine
the
like the
sun,
sun. And
in
hold you
the
in the palm
palm of
of
his
his
hand.
hand. Yeah,
the
I think
meaning
that's
is,
it.
yeah. I chose a different psalm, a different hymn that uses some of the same, language or the same intent that we'll talk about in a minute. But,
Have a hymn.
yeah, I think, and I do talk, and he does talk, which I had never thought of. You remember in the temptation story, how Satan uses parts of this psalm to tempt Jesus, and to the angels who come and minister to you, and how maybe we have that, in our sense of interpretation, may have misinterpreted this psalm, relying on the words of the psalm rather than the presence of God. So, an interesting kind of, and it wasn't a sidebar, but it was, I had never, actually thought, I did not know that was a practice, to take parts of this psalm and put them in an amulet and wear them as protection, right? Like that. I didn't realize that was a practice. But how that would be perhaps a bit of magical thinking, right? That we like to employ, superstitious ways of seeing the world. But let's get back to the voices
Sorry.
if we can. He says that the part of the bird guarding their young is a different voice. Right? With his pinions, he will cover you. Beneath his wings, you will find refuge.
So I guess verse 2 is the I verse.
Yes, right, the I
Would
voice.
say to Adna. And then I guess 3 through 8 are the you voice.
That's right. Maybe the priest answering, restating what we know to be true about God or what we believe to be true about God and God's faithfulness. And then,
9 would be I again.
right.
And then
Which is why he separated them, giving us the hint. Right?
and then 9b would start you again until 13.
Say that again. 9B, you mean?
Yeah,
Mhm.
the second part of
Okay.
You have made your refuge the one on high would be 9b,
Yeah,
the second phrase of 9. Going to 13, the end of 13.
Mhm.
And then 14 through 16 is the big voice.
Right, I will, what is I going to do? I will rescue, I will raise up, I will answer, I will be with, I will strengthen, I will honor, I will sate him and show him salvation. So, yeah, this is the promises of God for the pilgrim.
Mhm. And it's a different I.
Yes,
It's
that,
not
that's,
the pilgrim, it's the Lord.
yes, that's Rabbi Feld's point, yeah.
I'm still struggling. I talked to Allison about this a little bit yesterday. On page 51, he says in the first part, it is the human who is frequently the enemy, hunting other humans like an animal. And it is a bird that saves the human. I just can't find a human hunting another human. And I really tried. I've read and reread, and I just can't find that in the first part of this song.
Well, there is the talk about the flight of the arrow. So you think of being attacked by enemies, by an army.
Mhm.
a thousand falls to your left.
And then verse 7.
Yeah.
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
thousand-
that. I just really, I just couldn't find it.
I mean, I had a problem with verse 10 because where it says no disease will touch your tent. And I mean, apparently the disease in this means something other than disease, right?
No, not necessarily. I mean, let's think
I mean,
about the kind of dangers that Israel would experience. What would they be? They would be from attacking armies, or neighbors who had issues with their religious beliefs or whatever, and then disease, which would have been, I remember one time a priest talking about, can you imagine at the time, at biblical time, if you had a toothache, you could die from it, right? You cut your foot, you can die from, there was no way, there was no penicillin, we know all this, right? But these things that can befall you are many, and they would probably fall basically into two camps. Those who would like to do physical harm to you as an enemy, and the kinds of things that attack the body, right? Disease, plague, infection, bad food, you know what I mean? So this is these two things.
No, but why does it say that no disease will touch your tent? I mean, doesn't mean that bad people are the ones who cut their feet, does it? No.
Not necessarily. It's like, what, doesn't it sound much like, think of the Irish rune of blessing, right? When the things that we say, may God hold you in the palm of God's hand, may the wind be always at your back, may
Right.
your whatever it is. So it has that same rhythm to me of many blessings, right? Like, what were the things that you would wish for people? That you be kept safe from harm, that when you say you're going somewhere and I say traveling mercies, right? Like, these are just the ways that we speak when we're wishing someone well on a journey or life or whatever. At the end of every worship service, go in peace, or may God, in the name of God the Father, God the Son, and Holy Spirit, be with you this day and remain with you always. Now, does that mean that you're not going to go out and get hit by a truck? No.
Oh my
doesn't
God.
mean- I'm just saying,
I wonder if this is referring to the afterlife.
in what way?
No harm will befall you and no disease touch your tent. For it says before, for you have made your refuge the one on high.
Yeah,
I mean, I just wonder if that is making, we're gonna go through life where we do get hurt by other people, where we do get disease. But if we put our trust in the Lord, and they believed in, some of the Jews believed in afterlife, one day no harm will befall you. That's kind of like the problem with the other psalm.
yeah,
Heaven has not happened on earth yet.
yeah.
And
Well, I think to your point, Lawson, he talks about the fullness of time, right, on page 53. This is how he tries to tidy that up a bit. If that helps, Kate.
Okay, I didn't get but to 51.
So he says, God promises something that has not been mentioned or even alluded to earlier, the fullness of days or time. In the fullness of life, that is the ultimate reward. The images of protection voiced earlier were of salvation from the negative, saving from harm. Only God's voice is able to assure the positive, length of days, peacefulness, and bounty. And the life of the pilgrim is tied to something greater, God's triumph. Eventually, he doesn't have the word eventually, but I'm saying eventually. The pilgrim himself, proudly living and breathing, will be an outward sign of God's presence and power. So yes, and I think, Lawson, this is the kind of theme we'll see in other Psalms. This, what scholars have sometimes called the already and the not yet, right? The moving in the promise of hope, and that it doesn't always happen in our time. It happens in the fullness of time. That's the expression, the theological expression we use, right? The fullness of time. We hear it in our Eucharistic prayer, that Jesus came in the fullness of time. Yeah.
Paul talks about that later on the page where he says the poem gains its power through the progression of dialogue that is then capped by God's own hopeful words. And the voice of God takes us to a place only God can reassure us about, the future.
Mm-hmm. And then it goes on to kind of tie back to the last chapter, doesn't it? This is an ultimate imaginative act on the part of the devotee. For the future has no reality, it only exists as an act of consciousness. In imagining the future, the psalmist offers the ultimate reassurance of prayer. The future contains hope, blessing will come.
And you know what is so tantalizing about this is through prayer, sometimes we do get the promises of the future now.
Yeah. How have you seen
Not
that?
all the time, not all the time. I mean, we are not, by saying prayers, we are not the power that fulfills those prayers. But sometime in God's mercy and goodness and wisdom, sometimes our prayers are answered, and the hope of the future becomes a present reality.
Yeah. And I hope this gives us all permission to continue the conversation, which is what prayer is. Prayer is conversation. It's speaking, it's listening, it's, silence, it's whatever, but this is what's happening in this psalm. There's speaking, there's an answer. Doesn't always happen that way, but I think it gives me encouragement to continue my life of prayer as conversation. Not as outcome seeking. I have outcomes that I want, desire, maybe even need, right? But I think that what's important for me to remember is the conversation, the intent, and that perhaps if God isn't answering the way I want, what is God saying? You know, what is most important? That last little paragraph on my handout talks about the danger of the psalm because its assurance of protection is so comprehensive and confident that it might be subject to misuse or superstition, which is sometimes what happens to us in prayer as well. But bits of text have been used in amulets that were believed to have magical protection for those who wore them. The promise that ministering angels would guard the way of the pious, i.e. the belief of the guardian angel, which we're all very familiar with. Recall that Satan employed the verses 11 and 12 in his attempt to corrupt Jesus, both in Matthew's account of the temptation in the wilderness and in Luke's. Temptation to take protection of God into his own control. This is the slippery slope. Recognizing God's protection and then taking God's protection for his own purposes. Jesus knew that this was a way to test God, not a way of trust. I think I could probably pray on that for a while about how I do that. How often, how easy it is for me to take and substitute testing God for trusting God. And as
Say it
we-
again.
testing God instead of trusting God. Because the setup from Satan was a test, right? This
Yes.
was, at least according to Matthew and Luke. And Mark's version, even though it's only one sentence, is also a test. So what does it mean? And then Jesus gave us a good example of trusting God when he said, no, we're not doing that. I'm going to trust in God. So real trust does not seek to test God or to prove God's faithfulness. I think it's our human nature. I think our world is constructed in such a way that testing has earned a pretty high standard, right? I mean, and so trust difficult because for the same reason why the Psalms are either going to be helpful for us or not, something that helps build our trust in God, as opposed to something perhaps that doesn't, right? It is something, it's not, I don't think we can solve it. There's nothing to be solved here, but there are places that are going to strike your heart. There are going to be places that strike your heart. And my encouragement is just to let them and to see where they lead and to see, what that's about. And hopefully some of these messages in the Psalms do that. Like Lynn, like being, even though it doesn't sound like much to you, or you think, why am I stuck on, where's the man pursuing him, right?
Yeah.
Why am I stuck on that? There's something there.
Yeah.
There's something there for you. I trust God in that way too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my hymn choice, a little different than on Eagle's Wings, but a hymn nonetheless. Sing praise to God who reigns above. I'm going to try to remember the tune for Lawson's sake here. I listened to it yesterday several times going, yes, I know this tune. Sing praise to God who reigns above, the God of all creation, the God of power, the God of love, the God of our salvation. With healing balm my soul he lifts, and every faithless, murmur stills to God all praise and glory. We sing it with other tunes as well, with others. It's a German hymn tune, probably stolen from the French. You know, there's some argument about that, but it's probably, was it like the 16th century? So it's been around for a while. It's not new, but so, and then the second verse, what God's almighty power hath made, his gracious mercy keepeth by morning glow or evening shade. His watchful eye never sleepeth. Within the kingdom of his might, lo, all is just and all is right. To God all praise and glory. Let all who name Christ's holy name give God all praise and glory. Let all who know his power proclaim aloud the wondrous story. Cast each false idol from its throne. The Lord is God and he alone. To God all praise and glory. Well, on that note, it's 11:01. Okay, I think next week we have two more chapters on joy. And already you can see the progression. So it's 82 and 23. So one of them very familiar, right? Right?
Yeah.
You know the one. The good shepherd.
23rd Psalm, the Lord is my
23rd Psalm.
shepherd.
The Lord shepherd. Yes, very familiar. And then 82, he titles Justice. So again, his unfolding is helping us, his gentleness in sort of helping us look at the paradoxes of our own faith and the own biblical theology. So moving us though through these two places of joy, because if you think about the 23rd Psalm, you know it's full of paradox, and it's, you know, and yet we find it so comforting. We find it so comforting, and so we're going to look at that. So, and then after that, as we move into despair, we're going to have to travel 3 Psalms at a time for a couple of weeks as we look at the time. I'm trying to get us gently into the practice of reading the Psalms and then move more quickly. But thank you all for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all either on Zoom or in church soon.